Okay, we're live again. This is Street Fight Politics for all of our street fight politicians out there. We have, it's another batshit crazy week with a tsunami of what really is distraction. You have, the stuff hiding behind the scenes that they're doing and secret is the stuff you need to worry about. This stuff that they're doing out in public is really just to keep you from thinking about the horrific damage they're doing to every part of the economy, every part of your life. If you are somebody that is not white Christian male, uh, things are not going well for you. That's just the only way to say it. Here is, to me, what is being demonstrated in no uncertain terms that we now have a president that we're getting ready to run into a crisis because his dementia is no longer hideable. And it's something that if you worry about somebody who can't even keep a train of thought long enough to sign one of his 150, 180 executive orders, wanders away from a table and has
Yeah.
to have somebody grab him by the shoulder, come back over here, little boy, please sign your executive order for God knows whatever it is. Oh yeah, it's about we're going to bring down drug prices, except it doesn't do that. It just makes it so it's going to be more difficult to get your drugs. Uh, that's getting to be something that as we go forward, I don't know what it's going to take for the Republicans to say, we can't have this. I mean, it's like they managed to hide Reagan's dementia for the last 2 years. They just basically kept them from going out in public. Unfortunately, nothing disastrous happened during that time period that would have required him to actually make a decision. I'm pretty sure that was Al Haig probably making the decisions during that time. Wilson back, literally over 100 years ago, was a stroked out invalid, and they let his wife basically carry on, until the end of his term. So it's been done in the past, but the world moves too fast to have people that, in theory, you're supposed to still do what they tell you to do, and it's you know he's pressing buttons at will. I mean, what do you think, Christine?
I am on the same page as you, where, and this is very rare for me, I'm just kind of at a loss for words, and not because there isn't plenty to say about what's going on. I think you laid it out rather elegantly. But it's just that there is so much to say, and that trying to make sense of it is in some ways a futile exercise and almost like a waste of energy. And I think like the problem solver in us all, wants to figure out exactly who or what the problem is in that administration, and knock the knees out from under it. But the shock and awe does work to a certain extent, especially on an individual level. And I think that this thing with the tariffs, it's kind of like just this cycle that we're going to go through where something happens with the economy, and then, they use that to cover up something else that's going on, that, by the time we catch up to that, then it's something else after that. So, it's not an ideal situation. I am hopeful because I think that the resistance to this on a personal, like person to person, individual level, as well as an institutional level, is really ramping up. But I still think that there's going to be more pain before we get to the other side of this, and it's kind of predictably unpredictable at this point.
Well, I think there's going to be two key times that this tariff mess is going to finally hit home. I think the first is going to be back to school. And right now, the stuff for back to school should be on boats getting here because you need that much lead time to start getting in, all the paper and 250 pencils and, the stuff that kids need to do. And so now you're going to be having moms go in, literally at the end of July here in Phoenix. I mean, it's like we start really early here, and they're going to be looking at it and say, oh, there's no backpacks. So little Caitlin, you're going to have to do with your old backpack. And I'm sorry that it's not fashionable anymore, but that's just the way it's got to be. This is the thing that just really galls me about this, is that you've got this guy, a billionaire, telling moms that they can't afford $37, much less one or two for the most part, because we're talking West Phoenix, not North Scottsdale, and that's the difference between the poor and the rich places. For you not familiar with Scottsdale with Phoenix economic geography, that he comes out and he's stuck on, well, you just don't need $30 or $35 at Christmas. You can get one or two. Well, hold on, Mr. President for everybody. Why is it that you will make us, the middle class, sacrifice and the lower class? Why is it that billionaire can have 30 to 35 billion? Why isn't it that, one or two will do? I think, 1 or 2 billion is just fine. It's like that's going to still buy you yachts and islands and off the coast of Greece and whatever else, your little mind can come up with to spend your money. But you're not asking any sacrifice for anybody in the oligarch class. But, oh, that's right, I forgot. It's like you've got the true oligarchs in Qatar sending you plane worth $400 million as a gift. So how nice for you. It's the corruption is it's like you can't even parody it anymore. It's like it's before 2016, if you would have said we would have been here in a situation that we have a president that is openly taking a $400 million bribe and trying to tell you it's okay because, it's not for him, it's for the presidency. And it's like, I guess you haven't read those rules about emoluments, people coming in. I mean, it's Christine, you think it's okay to take a $400 million plane, even if it's, going to go to your foundation afterwards?
First of all, please spare me this bullshit about the foundation. However, I completely agree with you. I think, and I especially agree with you about the portion of in 2016, this was beyond my wildest dreams, what we are going through right now. I think part of the reason it was beyond my wildest dreams is because there was a lot of gaslighting going on. I think that there were a lot of people who spotted this, who called it out for what it was. They, read the room with what was going on with, defunding the humanities, with these, tech monopolies starting to grow, and, AI kind of getting to the point where, and I had a professor who, I'll never forget this, said to me, you shouldn't be terrified about what AI is doing in the future. You should be terrified about what AI is doing right now. And then this was in 2016, but that was because they were already, hoarding all of this data, building these profiles on us, and figuring out ways to manipulate our behavior with these little Skinner boxes that we carry around with us all day long. And, it's been almost a decade, or just about a decade, since Trump sort of glided down the staircase and announced that he was going to become the president. And I remember I used to work in a Holocaust museum, and one of the Holocaust scholars that worked there was talking with another one of our colleagues. And they were saying to each other, he'll never get elected, because they heard his rhetoric. And, working, in the Holocaust Museum, like, you're very sensitive to that type of rhetoric and, where things are going. But they never in their wildest dreams thought that he would get elected, nevertheless, to do an insurrection and then get elected again. So here we are, though. And where do we go?
That we've got a fundamental flaw in the way that we pick our leaders and hold our elections. The I've talked about, can we undo this? What's it going to take to do it? And the problem is that we are no longer trustworthy or trustable. And it's not related to Trump necessarily. It's the fact that we could elect a guy like Trump in the first place.
Yeah.
Which means that if it happened once and then twice, that means it can happen again. And, you can't have this where one term you've got a Democrat and you come up with one policy, and then you come in and it's somebody like Trump, you completely undo everything the last guy did, do your stuff, and then you flip flop back and forth like that. That's not a world superpower. That's that's a tin-horn dictatorship, trying to stay afloat. And unfortunately, we're now in the tin-horn dictatorship territory. And it's the thing that makes it even more worrisome, and it's like one of the things that is, sort of got lost in all the shuffle, was Stephen Miller coming out and saying, well, we're looking very strongly at overturning habeas corpus and the writ of, which is, if you know anything about the law, and you don't have to be a constitutional scholar to realize just how frightening that is, that they would even come out loud and say it.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't overturning Roe v. Wade. It's overturning the fucking Magna Carta, for Christ's sake. I mean, this is so deep in like our, I guess, common law of Western civilization, which they claim to value so much, by the way, that it's flabbergasting. But somewhat amusing and somewhat frighteningly, it actually backfired against him, because now that's gotten a lot of people talking about the Second Amendment again. And, there's no habeas corpus, and you're going to go burst into people's homes at, 3 a.m. with a mask on. Somebody,
that's inevitable.
Exactly. It's going to be, especially in states that have castle doctrine, and it's going to be legal. So now, as a result, ICE in Tennessee isn't doing those no-knock raids.
Because one, that's where you have to actually thank God for the Second Amendment, because if you're going to bust through my door, you won't have to worry about the wall of wood there. You're going to run into a wall of lead.
Yeah.
Goddamn who you are or what you think you represent. You come in my house like that, you're not going to be walking back out. They're going to be dragging you out.
And
it's one of those things that, over on the left, we've been very anti-gun for very good reasons. That it's like, I can have a gun. I'm not batshit crazy. Unfortunately, after doing 30 years of trauma as an anesthesiologist, I can tell you that there's a lot of people out there that really shouldn't have guns.
Yeah.
And but that's not the law. It's like you can be a drunk on drugs. Now, in theory, I mean, when you sign out your ATF forms, you say that you're not using drugs and you're not an alcoholic, have mental instability problems. And it's like, well, where's the penalty for lying? Because there's plenty that do. And I think that it's finally gotten through in the left-wing sphere of things that if we're not going to be able to get rid of guns, we're joining the party. And it's, and we're not going to just join the party a little ways. We're going out and getting the big stuff, and we're going to train up how to use it. And more importantly, we're going to cross that mental divide that if push comes to shove, we're not going to think about having to use it. We're just going to do it. And I'm seeing that call over and over and over again. And the forums I participated in, just posts on, articles in the Washington Post, it's crossed over so that it's no longer a verboten topic. It's something that, okay, we've got to consider this, that, you see these guys with their little 3%er logos on their trucks. That's the guys you're going after.
Yeah, because you know what? It's going to be a huge problem, because there is going to be a day after. And then what type of, frankly, denazification process are we going to have to go through as a country so that we're not constantly dealing of these insurgencies of propagandized incels, essentially? The people that they are hiring for these ICE raids are utterly unprofessional. They have no idea what they're doing. They're not being paid very well, frankly. The whole thing is just a big joke. And that's dangerous. It's exceedingly dangerous. It goes on and on and on, but I think that as the left, when we thought of the tyrannical government, we thought about George Bush and Dick Cheney coming for us, with like a nuke or something. And we would be like, okay, why do we need guns? Because if the government is really going to come after us, then we're not going to be able to like stop them with a shotgun. But now it's like we have an imagination for what it actually looks like when you have insurgents living among you in your society.
At this point, you can fight back because it's still a fairly even match. They're showing up with guns, you have guns. But I don't have access to Bradley personnel movers and small tanks, and they do. And it's like, and if you look at what's happened in third world holes, they eventually pull that stuff out when they want to quell unrest in the population. They bring out the big guns like they're going to war against their own people. So we haven't seen that. I haven't heard or seen that that's going to be something they're contemplating, but it's an easy, just pick up the phone and say, we need to get the guys down in Texas at Fort Hood or whatever they're calling it these days, send them out. We're going to nationalize the National Guard in state after state after state and deploy them on the street so that we can start doing document checks when you're going around. It's, it's no longer in the realm of something you can't imagine, or you're just being way too extreme in your fears. It's no, that's what they've done in the past. These guys are headed down that path. The only good news is we're finally seeing Democrats putting up a fight.
They are.
They finally decided that we have nothing to lose. They're finally reading the room correctly, that we need to get in there and start fighting back, and doing it by calling out every Republican, linking Trump around their neck like an anchor, and not letting them get away with abetting cutting Medicare and Medicaid by almost $1 trillion.
And it's so sinister too. The whole thing is so sinister because they're trying to make the American people split their energy between saving our basic, very thin social safety net and literally protecting the most vulnerable people in society. Like every day, it's like, what do I spend more time on? The fact that they're, trying to steal my grandma's social security check, or the fact that they're trying to deport my neighbor? Like, you know what I mean? And it's
unfortunately,
horrific.
I think that the deport your neighbor stuff doesn't get as much play as when you take vets who are very easy to piss off. And it's like, once they get past the age of 50 and 60, they usually have lots of time to fight back. You start taking away their access to healthcare that they have earned every right to have because they put their lives on the line fighting in Vietnam and Iraq again and Afghanistan, and all these places that frankly we've ramped up and had burn pits and all the other stuff that they did. Being in the military doesn't mean that you have to give up your right not to be exposed to every toxin in the world, just out of the expediency that we're the military and we don't have time to take care of it.
Yeah.
If you're going to do that, then you take care of these guys. And what I'm seeing is that the politicians like Ruben Gallego and Mark Kelly, who are basically putting themselves up to be targets of Trump, and they're MAGA's coming after these guys. I mean, you have Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon calling Mark Kelly a traitor.
That's rich.
That's a decorated Navy combat pilot, flew in space multiple times, is American as it gets. a traitor.
Remember,
Because
every accusation is a confession.
That is true. That is true. The good thing about this is that we're starting to see politicians ramping up into the 2026 campaign. And they're finally, it's like the name of our show, Street Fight Politics. They're going to come in and fight, and they're going to take it to the streets and fight. And they're going to show up not unarmed, but they're going to be showing up with knives and weapons. And I'm using this in a metaphorical term.
Yes.
Although it may come down to that we have to do that. But for right now, it's the matter that you're getting out there and letting people know that this is not okay. And I think that all these protests are having an effect. I think that Trump's getting really worried that, this is not like it was, from 2016 to 2020. There's no pink pussy hats this time. These are people that are truly pissed off.
They are truly pissed off. And they're only going to continue to get more pissed off for all of, the reasons that we just listed. And 2026 is closer than ever. And I am, thrilled to see more people getting confrontational, not observing norms, because these are not normal times. And that's what's going to keep them in their seats, is if they're able to match that energy. And who's been getting a little timid lately, now that she's been getting confronted, is Marjorie Taylor Greene. I think that she may have dropped out of the Senate race. She was on TYT. Yeah. Oh, I know. It's so sad.
I sent her a message. Don't let him push you around. Run for Senate.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. Exactly. And then swoop somebody else into that seat. God, wouldn't that be great? But she has dreams. I mean, I think she likes being in Congress for doing her little insider trading or whatever, but she's meant to be a propagandist. She started as a propagandist with her stupid little blog, and that's how she got her fan club. And she, became a congressperson. Probably Elise Stefanik helped her out or something like that. And now she's married to that propagandist. So, I mean, they're dating, I guess.
They're dating.
Yeah,
they're living in sin.
Yeah, they're living in sin. Exactly.
It's okay if you're a MAGA Republican, anybody else, that we don't have to follow those strictures of the Bible or whatever else they're saying. And so
pathetically, she went on the Young Turks a couple weeks ago. I don't know if anyone in the audience and if you're familiar with the Young Turks, but they are a famously progressive news organization. I think one of the first channels on Sirius XM, and one of the first real YouTube channels. They've been around since the Bush years, and they've done a complete heel turn over the last few years, and they're trying to do this weird Fox News fair and balanced thing. I know for a lot of us it was kind of like a punch in the gut. Then the other day they really did have Marjorie Taylor Greene on there and whitewashing her, just making her normal, and then kind of letting her get away with the Jewish space lasers thing. It was absolutely rich. But you see that she's trying to build these alliances in unconventional areas because she's starting to see the writing on the wall. And I think she knows that there's going to be a day after, and then there's going to be oversight, and she's going to be in big trouble.
Well, there's going to be once we get to that day, there's going to be a lot of people that their lives are going to be totally ruined. There's a reason why Elon Musk has been going through destroying evidence at the highest levels, because he was correct. If Kamala Harris had won, they would have done investigations, and he would be going to prison. He would be the richest man in the world ever to go to prison, but they would have built him his own special prison to do that stuff. So yeah, there is going to be a time when there's comeuppance, and there's going to be judgment, and there's going to be punishment. It's going to be pretty harsh.
That makes me think of what you were saying before about how we are, as a country, unfortunately, inherently less trustworthy. And we have all of these things going on that will make it so that we're in decline, and we're going to have a diminished place on the world stage. if something like that happens, do you see us having to be part of the jurisdiction of like an international criminal court or something like that? Because right now we can throw our weight around, but when we're not the world superpower anymore, are we going to have to play by the rules? And then if that's the case, could we see some of these people who are committing these atrocities facing international justice to which they cannot be pardoned from?
Well, I think that's actually a great point, because I think that politically that gives Democrats a way out of that. So instead of us having to be the people that prosecute, put them in, we say, you know what, we might have some bias, so we're going to send you to The Hague and let the International Justice Court, try you. And it's like that, that gives us an out. And if you committed atrocities and they say that, they're going to do like they did to every German high command officer and hang them or shoot them, so be it. It's like that, it's not us that did it. So, that might be actually an interesting way to get around that. So,
and who might be what might be the catalyst for that? If we ever get Kilmar Abrego Garcia back, because he's going to say what's going on at CCOT, and Bukele is not Trump. He's not America. And they can, the international court can come after him. So if they go after Bukele.
Well, it's like if you look, it's like as soon as the IMF said, oh, we're going to cut off your little $300 million a year that you get from us to keep your country running, if you don't start following the rules of, only taking in people that have actually been convicted of something, that it's like he's been backing up real fast. And in fact, you haven't heard any more out of him since then, because, he had his little 5 minutes of fame, running it. We've got the world's worst prison. And now it's okay. I want that $300 million.
He did go back home and start arresting journalists again, though. So that is an unfortunate a byproduct of this situation. I will point out an interesting fact I learned, that 24% of El Salvador's economy is from remittances. And I think remittances...
That's Central America.
In general. And I feel like that is part of this whole story that's also not being talked about. With Trump lashing out, I do wonder how much of these deportations also are intended to cripple our neighbors and make them more vulnerable as well, because a lot of money is going to stop flowing there.
That is a great point, because when you take away 24% of somebody's economy, that destabilizes you. So It's not making us safer. It's actually making things far more dangerous, because if you don't have the ability to get food, shelter, water, and it's like a lot of that's coming from the remittances, that stops. That's how we get these gangs like Tren de Agua or whatever it is in Venezuela. Because if we can't make money through remittances, we'll start making fentanyl and shipping it up there, or growing whatever.
Yeah.
Because we don't have anything to lose, and we don't owe you anything.
100%. And, but if you're somebody who believes in technocracy and you want the whole fucking hemisphere for yourself, then you're completely fine with all of those countries going bankrupt, because then they just become your vassal states.
Well, I mean, pretty much we've been treating them like vassal states for, pretty much since the 1890s. We've gone in numerous times, and pretty much to every Central American country, overthrown democratically elected presidents and replaced them with the dictator of our choice, train the military up on how to suppress the population. And here we are. Yeah. We have a place that, depending on how you look at, is, a danger to our safety. I mean, so in that case, they're actually truly correct, but it's not something that is intrinsically created by their society. We've created it externally. We did. Not China, not Russia, not Cuba. Now they've tried, over the years, they've tried to take advantage of it, of what we've created. But, United Banana Company is probably responsible for more dictatorships in Central America than any other institution in history.
Yeah, they don't call it a banana republic for nothing.
I'm going to tangent back here for a second. It's like, we're sort of exploring the roots of, how we got to where we are. And it's the lack of insight and foresight by Trump and all these other maggots that, are pulling his strings. They don't recognize that, one of the downsides of sending all these people that are here legal or illegally, back to their countries is that they're taking away their ability to feed themselves through the remittances. So there's no foresight. What's the downside of this? They don't do this. It's like Bobby Kennedy shutting down all the research into cancer stuff. I mean, there's trials going on now that were based on immune studies that actually cure, some abdominal cancers. And they're stopped dead in their tracks right now.
You know who I bet is going to pick them up? You know who's going to start doing the research now? Vivek Ramaswamy's pharmaceutical company, JD Vance's, the companies that he's invested into. Your Peter Attia's and people like that. What's going to happen is the oligarchs are just going to buy the science now. And then they're going to use the studies and the science to sell us all continuous glucose monitors. That's a fun propaganda story, actually, if you ever want to get into it. But I think
Please
do.
Yeah.
Oh, you do want to get into that? That's a fun story. Yeah. It's essentially, I'm a woman of a certain age. So I'm always kind of thinking about how do I age well? What do I need to watch out for? So my grandmother had diabetes. So that's always something in the back of my head. I want to make sure that I'm processing blood sugar well. I noticed a couple of years ago, I started just getting a lot of content about blood sugar and sugar's, the root of all the problems and stuff. And I do believe it is the root of a lot of problems. Don't get me wrong. But there was a lot of priming going on. Then I noticed that people are starting to talk about how in other countries you can get CGMs over the counter. There start being different programs that you can kind of enroll in the United States to get a CGM and kind of look at your blood sugar and test and see it works, what doesn't work. And I bought one. I did do it. I bought into the marketing. It was insightful. It was kind of cool, right? But you see how they're building this narrative, right? Where they've started priming me for a few years when they start this scientific research. How are we going to make an over-the-counter CGM that we can sell to anybody? And how are we going to make sure people want to buy it? Well, we make sure that there's, this conversation going on about sugar and public health and things that we eat, the need to collect data about your health with your Apple Watch and your Oura Ring and how this is like an extension of that. Then they start doing research about how it's helpful. They start buying the journals, publishing the research about why this is good. And then all of a sudden, anybody can buy a CGM anywhere, and we all feel like we need one right away. And that's what the NIH is going to turn into. It's going to turn into a marketing arm.
Over my dead body, it's going to turn into that. So it's like, for right now, they're shut down. I mean, it's like the NIH in history is probably the most valuable institution in human history for all the stuff that they've researched, discovered, and come up with cures. It's just a list of Nobel Prize winning effort after Nobel Prize winning effort that it's our crown. As far as I'm concerned, it's the crown jewel of, and the pinnacle of achievement for American society. It just truly is. But we've got somebody in there that is going to bring in as our next Surgeon General, a woman in her 30s that no longer holds a medical license, that now pushes wellness products and vitamins, and is a huge proponent of drinking raw milk. And it's, and I mean, literally, she said, as long as you can meet the cow and meet the farmer and you can pet the cow, that will reassure you that the raw milk is safe to drink. And it's, they came up with that pasteurization stuff for a reason.
And it's also this fucking pseudo intellectualism where she thinks because she went to medical school for a time that all of a sudden that she's an expert on every type of science and everything you put into your body. And, she knows best when it comes to pasteurized milk.
You got to remember, this is also the conspiracy theory that it's not necessarily that she knows best. She's evangelizing and proselytizing that, she's going to not take part in corporate medicine and traditional medicine where they're selling you drugs. And, from their standpoint, it's like, we're not promoting cures with Boehringer Ingelheim. But we've come up with these medicines because they actually do work. And as much as I do not like big pharma, they are unfortunately a necessary evil.
They are. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, and what I was going to add in is that both she and Bobby Kennedy are horribly anti-vax, which is why we now have the largest measles outbreak in 3 decades taking place in West Texas, now into New Mexico, and spreading.
It's an absolute tragedy. And I agree with you that our science really was like a crown jewel achievement, and still is for the time being. People come all around the world to not only get healthcare here, but to also make contributions and do research. And, I think that some of the discoveries have been truly amazing. On a personal level, I have psoriatic arthritis. I got that when I was 17. Because of insurance and also the fact that, the biologics that they had available back then, I had to live like over a decade with, a lot of debilitating pain and, skin problems. And it was a huge issue. But over the last 10 years, they've improved these drugs so much that I have, like nearly no symptoms. And I have to do a shot, twice, once every 2 months or something like that. I could never have dreamed about that 10 years ago. So I think the fact that, people like Robert F. Kennedy are so flippant about, what those drugs do for people. And even things like, antidepressants or mood stabilizers, antipsychotics, things that may not always maybe overprescribed in some circumstances, but they're not here for no reason. And I really think that the problem with big pharma is not that they create cures and they make medicine. It's the price gouging and the profiteering. And they've sort of like separated those things because they're fine with the profiteering. They're fine with the wellness profiteering and the CGM profiteering and all of these other things. It's just something about medicine that they don't like. And I'm not really sure where that comes from.
It comes from the fact that they like money.
They do.
It's very, very human of them like that. So,
we all like money a little bit, but I also like to sleep at night. So I guess, but our current political system kind of rewards sociopaths as it's being demonstrated.
Well, we're going to have some massive changes to our system. We've been keeping this system going, since 79 when we signed the Constitution the first time around, which was a huge compromise so that the slave states would join in. And we've gotten to the point where those compromises has made it untenable really to continue. And the really bad news is that we're only 3 or 4 more states saying that they want to have a constitutional convention. And guess what? If we, go into a point where we're going to have a constitutional convention, it's over. It is just over. That's when you start looking at, you start breaking us up into 4 or 5 different countries, because there is no way you're going to get California liberals from around San Francisco agreeing to anything from, redneck politicians like Tommy Tuberville from Alabama. It's like, that Venn diagram don't overlap. In fact, they're not even close. The circles aren't even close to each other. So,
you know what? You bring up something really interesting, though, because I saw something on. My first reaction to when you said that was like, yeah, well, you know what? They got to learn to live in a country together. Like it's. I think localism is good to a certain extent, but I think this hyper localism is. People got to get over it. I listened to an interview, Ezra Klein, with, I think her name is it Anne Glusenkamp Perez? She's the representative from Washington State, and she's kind of considered to be one of the new blue dog Democrats, definitely a little bit more, to the right. And has voted, has had some questionable votes. And she did this interview with Ezra Klein where, far be it from me to criticize, but the girl needs some media training because she came across like a wet blanket, very unenthusiastic, but very insular, almost to the point where I was getting the feeling like, okay, you win over your constituency in your, purple state or county because you talk shit about other Democrats. And you're like, I'm not like the other Democrats. I'm not like other girls. She's talking about right to repair and bringing industry back. And I'm like, I'm sorry. In one breath, you're saying that, these Tesla protests are a real problem. Why are people protesting American-made cars? And then in the next breath, you're complaining about right to repair. And it's like, hello, that is a perfect issue that you could unite with other Americans on, is right to repair. You don't have to make it all woe is me. You don't understand our lifestyle up here, blah, blah, blah. You could say, here's our common ground. And that's the problem, is she doesn't want to do that. She wants to do hyper localism. And now she's scared that she's going to get primaried. And she's going on Ezra Klein and, crying about how she's just trying to go along to get along, so we can, not lose her district to a crazy Republican. But it's like, no, you know what? You might lose your district to a real progressive. That's like, you know what? I value.
I've got zero problem with that. In fact, I would think it would be healthy that every sitting Democrat has a real challenger. And, let the best person win, because we need some people out there giving them some competition, making them elucidate, their thought processes on why they believe, what they see as far as the future. To just back up for just a second, one of the greatest pieces of damage that have been done to our country is the fact that we don't consider ourselves one country anymore. You come out after World War II, everybody was an American going over to fight the Nazis and then defeating Japan. We're all on one side. No, maybe not so much if you were in the 50s and you were Black or Hispanic or gay, or, it might not be all that one for one, but, you went through with the fiction that this is one country. We are becoming more and more siloed and atomized as a country. And it's like, I don't have any overlap with you. And it's like, I'm sorry. It's like, I look at these people wearing the red hats, with their beliefs. I don't have any overlap with you. Zero. You can come up with a topic and, every once in a while you'll get something that you miraculously agree on. And it's like, well, man, I better think about this again if we both agree on it. So, but that's the danger going forward right now, is we have real risks of becoming, from pretty much 5 different countries, with 5 different outlooks and, and it doesn't take much to do that. It's no, we're no longer in the world of Netflix fiction series on how this happened, or Margaret Atwood. As far as I'm concerned, it's like there are people using The Handmaid's Tale as a textbook. It's not a piece of fiction to be afraid of.
Well, I think that there are a lot of people who have seen this coming for a long time, and it just hasn't been a mainstream concern. I was talking to somebody about this today. I've been listening to a band called Marilyn Manson since high school. And one thing that Marilyn Manson was very famous for was railing against Christian nationalism in the 90s and 2000s. So one group that he talked about was Focus on the Family. And that's Christian nationalist group that, was very aligned with like Opus Dei in figuring out how are we going to overturn Roe v. Wade and, make all our Christo-fascist dreams come true. Lo and behold, I found out the other day that group still exists, but now they're called the American Federation for Freedom. So I think that, Christian nationalism is something that I think people can walk into a little bit unintentionally, right? Because there's plenty of Christians who are good people. And frankly, if we're looking back on ancient times, Jesus Christ did make the world a better place in a lot of ways. There was not that.
Oh no, he was that is the most woke liberal person ever to live.
Yeah, exactly. He made the common person matter for the first time in history. So, and even the Puritans were weirdly egalitarian. So it's like in Christianity, like there is this sort of, there is a thread of like freedom and human dignity and, something for people to latch onto. And, when it gets appropriated in this way, like when people say things casually, like people are allowed to read Bibles in prisons, but not in schools. Maybe we'd have less prisons if we let people read the Bible in schools. And it's like, okay, here, let's back up for a second. The Bible is good because it has, some stories in it, some, not all, not a Bible scholar, but that are like, moral stories that kind of give you an example of how to move in the world.
Two sisters sleeping with their father. I think that was that.
Yeah, not that one. Not that one. We don't like that
see,
one.
There's plenty of that stuff where it's like, oh, hold on, this is pretty racy stuff here.
No, we're like, I'm, the ones where you like wash the feet of sick people and you like feed kids and
nonsense.
Very woke. Nonsense. Yes, I like the woke Bible, the woke James version of the Bible. But in any case, when you think about that, it's like, well, we do teach those values in some ways. Like some of those values are just moral values. We're just teaching them in a secular way.
You do not have to be religious or Christian, even if you want to put it to that, because those are tenets of pretty much every religion. And if last check, there's like 4,800 plus.
Oh my God.
Recognized religions. I mean, some of them get pretty small. Like the Church of Doc Eddie. So it's like that now a religion. But the main ones, the Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, they pretty much all follow the same higher tenets in theory. You can be a Buddhist, you can be a Hindu. They all teach the same basic premises. Now, do they follow them? Not so much, because that's human nature. It's, we'll sin 6 days a week and go cleanse ourselves, on our day of holy obligation.
Well, and whenever you have anything that has that much institutional power, not only over resources, but people's hearts and minds, you're always going to have people like your J.D. Vance's, who I heard it was confirmed that he was over there greasing the wheels in Rome the day before the Pope died. But
speaking of Rome, we need to talk about Pope Leo the 14th. I mean, that is, talk about a woke liberal getting elected. I mean, he's following right after Francis. And in fact, I think he actually is taking a step further, because if you go back and look at Leo the 13th, who 1890s, early part of last century, wrote the encyclical that called for workers' rights and taking care of the common man. I mean, you talk about commie social stuff. I mean, that's like out there.
I mean, it doesn't, what's so funny though, is that like, it doesn't have to be commie socialism. It could be our own brand, like I agree with you. I think I guess what I'm trying to say is it's wild to me that that is the framing of people who claim to be Christian on the
We
right.
were at our most powerful, not back when we were doing tariffs back in the 1880s and 90s. I mean, Trump is so wrong about that. We had one economic disaster after another when we were in the tariff era. We were at our strongest when unions were the strongest. Because
Yes.
people like my uncle could live in Dayton, Ohio with, I don't even think he made it to the 8th grade. Functionally illiterate, but kept a job his entire life, raised a family of 3 kids, owned his house. Wife, my aunt did not work outside the home, and they were able to do that. You cannot do that anymore.
No.
You can barely, in fact, you can barely have 2 people working and keeping a household going. Here in Phoenix, the cost of housing has gotten to the point where you cannot be a young millennial, or actually, millennials are already, they're getting on in years now, but, being a Gen Zer and soon to be the alphas. I mean, it's like, where are you going to find $500,000 to go buy your starter home?
It's impossible. Well, I shouldn't say it's impossible. It is doable for some people.
If you're a licensed professional, you put in all this stuff, but unfortunately, even the licensed professionals are coming out. I'm seeing these young docs come out that have $500,000 of educational debt.
Yeah, and sometimes don't listen to Dave Ramsey; it'll give you nightmares.
So there's a lot of stuff I want to talk about that. If we're really going to try to turn this around, we've got to look at these younger generations and say, you know what, we're not going to saddle you with $500,000 of debt, because we're going to make it so that if you're going to be going to school, I'm the one that's going to invest in you, even though at my age, I might not see any return, but my kids are going to see the return. My grandkids, every generation after that are going to see the returns. It's like when I came out of school, the university at a Ivy League type college, I had $5,000 of university debt, $5,000.
Yeah.
Now, to me at the time, that seemed like a lot of money. Medical school, I came out with $90,000, which seems like a lot, but it wasn't crippling debt. It was one of those things I was able to pay off, fairly quickly, get on with my life. And trust me, I've made up in spades and paying taxes over the last 40 years. They got their money's worth.
I agree 100%, because I was a single mom making $14,000 a year before I was in school and while I was in school. And I now pay, $15,000 of taxes a year. And any federal services that I received during that time, I was on food stamps, I was on Medicaid. I think if you added up whatever I got over the course of those years, I've paid it back in taxes now that I have a job that's exactly subsistable. The way it's supposed to work.
And that's what, I'm going to, one of the things I want to see our politicians do is like, you want to be be anti-abortion and all these women are going to have kids, then guess what? We're going to make it so that they can have kids. It's like not everybody's Elon Musk that can go around inseminating women left and right. It has $350 billion to back it up. The rest of us, childcare basically takes up one person's entire income. It's expensive.
On PBS,
not just for one.
On PBS the other day, there was somebody that was their student loans were about to go back into repayment. They're already underwater because of childcare. So, people are getting hit really hard.
This idea that, we'll just give a woman $5,000 as a bonus for having a baby is the most ridiculous thing. Just the medical bills, are anywhere, depending on part of the country, on $10,000 to $20,000 to have a kid.
Yeah.
And then the medical bills that go to pediatrician, formula, diapers, childcare, keeping the roof over your head, food.
And not only that, you don't know if you're going to have your job. quarter to quarter. So it's like literally every quarter I got to sit there and be like, what doctor's appointments do I have to squeeze in? Because there's a good chance I could lose my job this quarter, not have health insurance for a while. And you want people to have kids in that environment? You're going to cut Medicaid to that extent.
Which is exactly the reason why people are coming to the very sound economic decision that, I cannot, I would like to have kids, but it's like, I'm not going to do it where I have to bankrupt myself multiple times, unlike our, ballyhooed president who's done it 6 times. Regular people can't afford to do that because you can't destroy your credit. And you do that for, you declare bankruptcy, and for 7 years, you are a pariah in the credit world.
Yeah, you are. And also, though, it's like we are creating a society that is so unfriendly to children. Beyond not having the child care, defunding the Department of Ed.
We've got it.
Yeah, defunding the Department of Ed, deporting 4-year-olds with cancer that are, United States citizens, because, and then these children, these immigrant children that are being put in front of the immigration court with no lawyers and no advocates. It's bizarre world. So for, people whose policies show so much contempt for children, it's absolutely rich that they're on this pro-natalist, BS or whatever. If you make the society good for people having kids, people have more kids. They might not have as many as you want, but that's okay. We don't need infinite growth. We need stability. We need, sustainability.
Well, I mean, that gets into a whole nother topic that, if we ever have a slow week news-wise from the Trump, we may get into some of those more esoteric intellectual topics like, do you always continue to grow, or do you have a stable economy? But women worldwide have been coming to that conclusion. You go into Europe and they are way, way below replacement. You go to Asia, they're below replacement. India is coming up on, going negative. Literally, the only countries in the world that are positive are all in Africa and South America. That's it. And even they are trending down fast.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it could also be part of like a natural cycle. Like, I am not an evolutionary biologist, so this is just pure vibes. But, like in nature, there is an infinite growth. There are cycles of, waxing and waning. And I think,
I studied that. I was going to say, it's like I actually studied that when I was considering being a math major. They're called predator-prey equations.
There you go.
It's like the waxing and waning. It's like, you have a whole bunch of quail, not many coyotes. The coyotes, when there's a lot of quail around, throw extra pups out. So you get 2 or 3 years where the coyotes get really big, and then they eat all the quail. And so there's hardly any quail. The coyotes starve to death, and the cycle starts again. And yeah, it's, we've got a world now that you don't have to, follow those dictates of math, but they're following the dictates of economics. And if you're a woman, you're not going to voluntarily bring kids into the world unless you're going to be supported. It's, it sucks being a single mom. And, to have a society where that's the norm, I agree with that. It's like, I think that it helps to, to have that village around you, because it's like in the 60s when I grew up, all the moms, it's like if we were doing something outside, they would just, either rat us out back to our moms, or, they would just come right in and say, stop it. So, that's the way it worked.
But if you want a village, you also have to be a villager. And for some people, it's going to be harder than others. And, some people, it's because we don't have that, that social stamina built up anymore because of the computer, the phone, the pandemic, all of that stuff. And for other people, it's just because the way that things are designed are inhospitable. If you don't have a car, if you don't know your neighbors, it's not easy out there for moms and women.
That's what we've created over the last 50, 60 years is we've atomized society. We do not see ourselves as one people. And that's the real danger, is that if things get out of hand here over the next few months, that you see, I think there's a real danger that you do split society. It's not, and I don't think there'll be necessarily a shooting war. It's just that things start to make sense. That really, Alabama, you go do your thing. And also, by the by, California is not going to be sending you money anymore. You're on your own, buddy.
And honestly, I do think that some red states are against the other red states, and they would like to see Alabama and Mississippi and those real tiny poor states go under, because then who are they vulnerable to? They're vulnerable to private prisons wanting to buy up land to put prisons on. They're vulnerable to people wanting to put data centers there. They're vulnerable to people wanting to buy up farmland and do, industrialized farming in those areas on a corporate level, not, just regular farmers or whatever. I think they want some of those states to be weaker without the federal money, because then they can scoop, scoop, scoop like oligarchs always do.
Well, and I think we're running up on time right here, but it's like you make a really good point. And that's when they're talking about cutting off funding, they're talking about bankrupting people. So it's like farmers are already losing farms. It's like the idea of a family farmer is basically, it's become a memory. It's not a reality anymore. And as much as I want to hurt those people in those red states, the people you're hurting are the most vulnerable. It's not going to be the rich white guys living in Birmingham and Huntsville in Alabama or Jackson in Mississippi. They already control this stuff.
Yeah.
And in fact, they're setting up, it's like Mississippi just said, we're going to get rid of our income tax. If you've ever driven through Mississippi before, the roads are like driving down a minefield. They are some of the worst roads in the U.S. And if those roads don't fix themselves, the money has to come from someplace.
Yeah. And how do you expect anybody to ever get a job? If you don't even have a decent road to walk down. And we're not even talking about having a car. We're just talking about being able to walk down the road.
Well, and guys, we're running up over an hour now. So it's like, the one thing that they had talked about is that if you're in those southern states right now, 40 to 50% of adults are not in the workforce and are not actively looking to get in the workforce. They have permanently left the workforce. And as a society, that is, that's a red alert thing, that if you've had that many people check out, that it's, you're coming up on game over.
One thing I will tell you is that we should, since at least 2020, be taking jobs numbers with a grain of salt, because they're not properly accounting for gig workers. And I do think that some of those people have transitioned probably into intermittent gig work so that they can, eat, but they're not in what we would consider to be traditional jobs.
No, I mean,
yeah, I don't think so either. Not out in the boonies.
Is in the Bay Area, where they've got good internet access. Not in Chilton, Mississippi, which is this little rural burg, with the nearest telephone poles, 3 miles away. So
can't even get internet.
Yeah. Well, listen, guys, we have gone on for over an hour. We've had another good discussion. Unfortunately, Harry, again, is having some internet issues. We're going to have to solve that because we need to have Harry back. Louis was in traffic going to an airport, which is pretty much his life these days, because he, our government analyst, is always on the road these days. And Ken, who hasn't been here, is off. He's having to do some job-related stuff. Hopefully, we'll get him back in sometime soon. But thank you for being with us. We really appreciate it. We like, your commentary. Susie and Laura seem to be, have some really good stuff for us. And we'll see you again next week.
Take care. Thanks, everybody.